If everybody you talk to agrees with you, you're not doing anything innovative. It's incremental. It's important. It could be very useful. It could make you a lot of money, but it's just not innovative. Once you have inventions, once you have technologies, and you ask yourself, well, how does this get used? I know how it gets published, but so what? It's published. And now how does it become a product? A new technology and a new indication is basically a double whammy. The liabilities are enormous and the profits are low, which is the complete opposite of what you want for a successful business. If you're going to get involved with something like this, that's got potential for big impact, get it going, get it moving, or just don't do it.
Welcome to the Diligent Observer from PitchFact. I'm your host, Andrew, and every week I share insights and strategies to help angel investors make better bets. My guest today is Dr. John Criscione. Dr. Criscione is a professor of biomedical engineering at Texas A&M University who trains medical device engineers while simultaneously inventing, testing, and commercializing medical technologies. Dr. Criscione has been serving in this capacity for over 20 years and also serves as the CTO for CorInnova, a biomedical technology company that we'll talk a little bit more about during today's episode. John is also an avid rock climber. He and his family boulder at the gym near our home, and we originally met while rock climbing together. And so I'm honored to have you with us today, John. Thank you for making some time, and I look forward to chatting.
Glad to be here, Andrew. Real excited to see some of the work you're doing. And I think, like I've said before to you, I mean, the angel investors have been key to a lot of technology development and innovation. So
Love it.
Opportunity to talk with that community is always high on my list.
Fantastic. Well, we'll come back to that. First question that I have for you, because this is where we initially met. I specifically remember I was really struggling with this boulder. I think it was like a V5 or maybe a V6. And you and one of your daughters were working on this boulder at the same time. And your daughter was just crushing it. And you and me were sitting there just trying to figure out how to get off the start. How long have you been bouldering?
Yeah. So I used to climb better than them. There was a brief moment when they'd ask me what to do, and now it's usually completely one way. I'd say probably 40 years I've been climbing.
Wow.
Of course, there weren't bouldering gyms back when I started.
So you were roughing it, doing outdoors?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So I was all over basically southern Missouri. I grew up in St. Louis region. The Ozarks, of course, have no shortage of caves and boulders and creeks and such. So every chance I got, I got out into the wilderness, and climbing was definitely one of my favorite activities. So.
Do you have any favorite stories from back in the Ozarks doing crazy stuff climbing?
My stories more recently involve the kids, right? And those are usually some more of my favorites. They've really taken to the gym. So it's been fun to switch from outdoor climbing to gym climbing and such. I used to climb anything, right? So it didn't matter if it was a fence, a cliff, a tree, you name it. So getting the ropes on was actually improvement in safety for me.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
I'm glad that you made it this far. We'll just say that. Really glad you made it this far.
And the top roping's fun. So I think our jam, of course, doesn't have top roping, but the bouldering is a great way to get exercise and really challenge yourself. You put yourself in situations where you're like, how do I get out of it?
Yeah, all the time. Well, I will always see you as a bouldering legend first and a expert engineer second. So that is the order of operations in my mind.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, maybe after today, it'll even out a little more.
We'll see. Yeah. Well, John, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your story just in general. Came from the Ozarks and the bouldering universe, and now you've been educating engineers for the last 20 years or so. Tell me a little bit more about your journey, and then maybe specifically the entrepreneurial elements and how you interacted with the early stage investing community.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really took a circuitous route here. It wasn't a direct shot. I did an MD, PhD at Johns Hopkins. So I was much more focused on just basic research, right? Coming out of that type of program, most people go into academic medicine and do research and practice. And that's kind of what I intended to do. And I was researching the heart. So basically, how does the heart function? Just basic understanding of it so that we can treat it better, right? The more we know about it, the more we know about disease too. And while doing so, I think it became obvious that there was just a lack of technologies that could really help the heart, particularly biventricular failure and pediatrics in general. I think there's just a lack of technologies that are focused on congenital heart disease and things. So I just really shifted. I shifted a lot more from the fundamental aspects of cardiac disease and more, how can we already take what we know? I mean, we already know stuff that's not being used. So knowing more isn't going to make that stuff get used more, right? There's this hope that we'll know more and we'll use it. But if people don't actually do it, if engineers don't actually start taking technology and building it into things that can be used by patients and doctors, then it just stays in the library. And as an engineer, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to think of an engineering career as filling a library. It's much more with engaging with industry, engaging with patients and such. So I started to drift a lot more towards that direction. And nowadays, that's pretty much all I do. Occasionally, I'll do some math and some theoretical work. But for the most part, it's a lot of device development.
So you mentioned at some point it became obvious to you that kind of the application of these technologies was more of the critical need in the world. I'm curious, was there a specific story? Was there some event that happened? Like, how did you transition from this general broad focus to really driving towards applying?
It didn't happen until I made discoveries. And then these discoveries just didn't go anywhere. I mean, nobody was working on them. Nobody wanted to license them. They're just, so I made discoveries, I made technologies, I made inventions, and it's like, well, somebody should use these, right? And then you go out there and you realize, you know what? Nobody's doing it. Nobody's taking these things and bringing them to market. They're working on their own stuff. And so if the inventors, right, if the people that develop it don't also get involved in the implementation, it just doesn't happen. It's just direct experience. It's just, once you have inventions, once you have technologies, and you ask yourself, well, how does this get used? I know how it gets published. I publish stuff, right? It's a piece of cake, but so what? It's published. Now how does it become a product? Right. Well, once I started to wrap my brain around that, it just became obvious that I wasn't the only one. And in fact, most discoveries just do not get used. They don't end up into technologies for just the lack of people doing it, and investors and the whole system.
Why do you think that is? Is it a awareness problem? Is it a focus problem? I'm curious, why is that?
So my direct experience is we tend to fund well the research at the government level and American Heart Association, American Cancer Society. A lot of these places fund the research, basic research. But they've really stopped there. We talk about the gap, valley of death, all of that. I mean, it's real. It's real. We make discoveries. There's early stage. You get publications. And then it's just hard work. It is just detailed hard. And it takes often a different person than the creative types that make the discoveries, or partnering appropriately with the right people. And it puts you outside your comfort zone, right? We don't teach that, or we didn't when I was a student, how to partner, how to build companies and stuff and get stuff to market. And then what you focus on in engineering, and it's capital intensive. So who's going to invest? Hopefully angels, but the government to some degree with SBIR and STTR has really upped their contribution to those early stages. Again, it's still not smart money. It's pretty dumb money. Only the government, I like to say, will just give you money based on writing a report. So you submit a grant, you don't meet with them, you don't do any Q&A, a panel looks at it and they send you money. So it doesn't happen like that in the real world outside of that, but it has helped, I think, spur some innovation along that would not have gotten funding otherwise. And we had SBIRs for the work I'm doing, STTRs, and it's been very helpful to do the early work to make it much more investable.
So it sounds like some of the core reasons are it's just a very different skill set, right? Commercializing a technology versus inventing and developing and researching a technology, totally different. Do you believe that inventors are typically the best equipped to be the ones that commercialize the technology, or do you think it's generally better to partner with someone that specializes in bringing a product like that to market?
I think it's better to partner. Inventors tend to get a little bit hung up on their invention. And sometimes you just need to make hard decisions that say, you know what, we just got to move in this direction and such. And I mean, inventors are very creative people. They understand the problems somewhat. And the markets, though, understanding the markets and some of those forces is a little bit, harder. Now, if you've been through it a few times, you start to get better at it. So seasoned inventors that have done a few and have made the mistakes, right, and learned from those mistakes, they're very savvy and they can get things going. But for the most part, inventors are just lacking in those next step skills.
You mentioned a term that I want to make sure we unpack, and that is the gap or the valley of death. What do you mean by those terms?
Oh, yeah. It's just the fact that, at least in medical technologies, to get to market takes a lot of money before you even sell it, but before you even get any money back. So every dollar you're receiving contributes to the gap in revenue, basically. So you're just in the red for a very long time. And then you only break out once you're on the market. We're in a very regulated market, so you can't sell until you get FDA approval or such, or 510Ks too. But you just can't make money while you're developing. You only pretty much make money afterwards. And that's kind of that valley. And I do want to say about inventors being involved. Even though they're not necessarily the best for running the show for the commercial stage, they have to be engaged. I think if you get a situation where an inventor just says, I want nothing to do with it, that's a red flag. I think that they're probably inventing a competing technology. They're like, I'm bored with this technology. I'm going to invent the next thing. And you're trying to commercialize the thing that they first invented, right? And now they're trying to put you out of business with this next iteration. It's very frustrating. And there's so many things that the inventors have to do, talking to investors, talking to the investors' experts, right? Investors always bring experts in your field. And usually the inventor knows the technology best. They may not know the market the best or the strategy the best, but they certainly know the technology the best. So having them part of the team, I think, is critical. And that valley's real. The valley, you have work to do. You have lots of stuff that has to be accomplished that takes money. And you won't get revenue until you've raised that money. And for medical devices, it's extremely challenging because your milestones are often raise more money. So you hit a milestone, right, with manufacturing, and you're still not on the market. So you need to raise money for a trial. Okay. So your next milestone isn't exit. Your next milestone is this company can now be, invested in for Series A or Series B or something. And that's frustrating because the only way out is to get more investment. So you still can't exit. You still can't do any revenue generating activities until the clinical trial's done. So it makes the early money is very important. How you run things right out of the gate, it becomes extremely critical. You got to set yourself up on a path that's sustainable. But you need people in for the long haul, right? You can't bring everybody on board. I think friends and family is very difficult in my area. Medical devices, it works in some areas, particularly if there's a short gap and you can get to revenue pretty quick. But friends and family, oftentimes, unless your friend and your family are medical device engineers, or they do it for a living, right? But for the most part, they don't. For the most part, they're not in that field. But you need people that are willing, and angels tend to have a much longer time horizon, which is very good, that they don't become antsy. What you don't want is a friend or family member that thinks this is the ticket to ride and it needs to go quick, right? You need to quickly do it. The FDA can only act so fast, and all the work you have to do to get technologies to market. It's just, there are intrinsic delays. And people familiar in this field kind of know what those are, and they're willing to sell them. And CorInnova is 20 years old. I got to tell you. So we are, that's not a success. I wouldn't say that's not a success. To being alive 20 years as a preclinical company, you want to be a clinical company, right? After 20 years. 20 years preclinical is, now there were lots of things along the way. And it's a class 3 medical device, which is the highest risk. And the non-dilutive funds is great, right? The SBIRs, STTRs keeps things alive. but they don't go the fastest, right? It takes a year many times to get one of those. And then we've just gone from non-dilutive to non-dilutive to non-dilutive. It's only about 10 years ago that we really started to kick into gear and get, investors other than state or government.
I'd love to learn a little bit more about CorInnova and your journey there specifically. Could you share kind of the inception story for the company? What did the first few years look like? And then at what point did you engage the equity investment community?
Sure. Yeah. So like I said, I made discoveries, right? And then one of the discoveries I made was that the motion of the heart is critical to its growth and remodeling. So your heart is actually changing right now. The half-life of a contractile protein in the heart is about 7 days. So every 2 weeks, you basically have a new heart machinery. And you know this from doing an exercise program, right? If you do an exercise program for a few weeks, you're like, hey, this is going pretty good, right? I can actually run or do the treadmill. So it's because of your heart changing. Your heart has actually reformed in those 2 weeks under new conditions, under exercise conditions. And it always basically rejuvenates based on what conditions it's on. For the most part. Now with heart disease, that goes awry.
So what does it say? What does it say about you that your rebuilding conditions have been on a bouldering wall for the majority of your career?
That takes some cardiac output. I think I don't know about you, but when I'm climbing, I'm like breathing heavy on some of those.
Yeah, big dynamic movement. You're jumping across. All right, sorry to interrupt. I had
no. And I don't know if you've seen me warm up, but I warm up on all the V0s and V1s and V2s. And, I just do one right after another. I don't stop in between them, just to kind of get my muscles warm and actually work in my heart. I like to do that. Now, the real cardiac output for me comes from, I'm a homesteader. So we've got 7 acres of problems out in Brazos County, just past the airport. And there's always a fence that needs repaired or something. So if you've got acreage, and we don't have a lot by Texas standards, 7 acres is not much. And I call it a homestead instead of a ranch or a farm because we don't make any money. We just burn it. But with the goats, the horses, everything, there's always something wrong. So I'm always digging a hole or stringing something up. And it puts the kids to work too. So it keeps them out of trouble.
Sounds like a great investment to me.
Yeah. It's my gym, all right. Yeah. I do join a gym, right, the bouldering gym, but I don't know if I'd join a gym that just had exercise equipment.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay, so back to CorInnova.
Yeah, so what I want to do is I want to get the heart moving right. So if the heart's not moving right, it doesn't grow right. So physical therapy does this, right? How do you get your elbow to move again? You start moving it. So when the motion of the heart is wrong, I want to correct it. So these devices actually help correct the movement of the heart and the motion of the heart. It's a very difficult device, right? I mean, it'd be great if you could if you could take a drug and make the heart move right, that would be awesome. But oftentimes it's mechanical and you just have to go in there and fix stuff and move stuff around. And that's kind of where my technologies really focus a lot on, is correcting heart motion. And I stupidly tried to go to market with that concept. I mean, there was some data behind it. I mean, it would really help heart disease. But at the end of the day, it was a new technology with a new indication. So it was a double whammy. So for 10 years, we were basically pursuing something that just couldn't be done, right? From a realistic standpoint.
Yeah. Explain what you mean by, you said a new technology and a new indication. What does that mean?
So the indication is how you use it. So how you use the devices for what patients to treat what diseases would be the indication. And nobody had ever tried to use devices to correct the heart motion and get the heart to recover, to rehabilitate the heart. That's not what, there's no devices that do that. So we were trying to pursue a new indication. So a new way to use a device. But we were also doing it with new devices. So these devices didn't exist. So it's just very difficult, and the highest risk classification, highest risk. And so with new indications, there's market risk. Because if some other device is selling in that indication, you're like, well, there's a market there, right? We know there's a market there because this device is selling and for this indication, and they're not going out of business. So there's definitely a market there. And then if you have a new device for an old indication, that's pretty good because you can steal market, right? You can say there's existing market And with this new technology, you may be able to steal some market share. Now, if you have an old device, you can think of a new indication. So you can take something you're already treating one disease with and say, I want to expand the indication. So, some devices, I can think of some failures in that regard. But for instance, these nerve stimulation devices. So they work very good for epilepsy. So vagus nerve stimulation. But the company tried to also use the same device, but expand the indication to depression, for treating depression, which is a much bigger market. Epilepsy is a big market, but depression is much bigger. So it made sense to expand the indication to a bigger market. But it just took so long and so many tests, and the FDA was resistant. I mean, there's a lot of good treatments for depression, and it's often very difficult to define depression. It's pretty simple to define epilepsy, right? You have seizures, right? So there's not a whole lot of ambiguity there. But once you start throwing in the ambiguity of depression with the ambiguity of treatments, you end up finding the certainty isn't all there, and it ended up being a loss for them. So I can think of examples where it goes wrong, but there's lots of examples where it goes right, where you've got an old technology and you expand the indication to a new indication. But a new technology and a new indication is basically a double whammy.
So you were taking a massive swing at something that was, it was a completely new device, and it was a completely new, unproven market.
Yeah.
Basically, somebody might say, wow, that sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Close to impossible to commercialize.
Yeah. So
you like easy problems is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, exactly. It was not an easy problem. Yeah, this is like the V14 of medical devices. So it's not happening, basically. But fortunately, I was smart enough to listen to people and start changing direction. And then about 2010, we got a real nice graduate of Texas A&M Electrical Engineering who was looking to help technologies that come out of engineering. So, he had worked, he had a career already and had some runway. And he said, what I can do with my skills is to help these innovative ideas actually get to market. So that partnering, I think, is so critical. And so he had a much better ability, I think, to see what the roadblocks were. And he had experience dealing with investors and such. And so he was much better, I think, at putting us on a path that was realistic. So I put us on a very unrealistic path. It was all based on the science, right? The science was there. The marketing and the investing, the company structure wasn't there. How do you get enough investment for that gap? You just don't. You don't have enough investment.
Well, I want to continue with the story, but before I do, I'm curious, what was that like coming to that realization? Like, because I'm sure, early 2000s, you're really excited about this. This could make a huge impact. And then to hit this brick wall and to then have to walk back and partner with somebody and bring in some help. Say a little bit more about maybe the personal journey for you of what that was like.
Yeah. I think, first of all, it's a side gig. So professor is my day job. So we were secure. So it wasn't that big a risk, if you will, starting off. It was definitely a time risk. I was basically working two jobs and only one of them was paying. But it was paying well. I think as a professor, I do fair. So I don't make as much as my other MD colleagues, but I would to see patients and that would really take my time. But the training engineers is a pretty good gig when you got it. But so it wasn't life or death for me. It was much more of, I want to succeed. So it didn't bother me at all. It was just, and I'm a type of person that's always looking for problems. I see problems in everything and that doesn't bother me. I mean, I'm looking for problems because I want to solve them and I want to solve them. The last thing I want is smoke screens or just things that are too good to be true. I get antsy when things look good. If things look like it's so easy, I'm like, I'm missing something there. There's something I'm missing. It was basically just confirming what I already suspected was that there's something I'm missing. And I just always learning and trying to move it along. So for me, I was kind of glad when I came to those, because I knew I was missing something. I know that it can't be easy. So what am I missing? So I almost felt relieved this is what I'm missing. So this is really where the hard parts are.
So what was the pivot or what was the new direction when that new partner came on board? Like, talk through the next few steps. And then it sounds like that's around when you all really engaged the investing community.
Yeah. Because we knew that was next. And my engagement with them wasn't great. My skill set is certainly on the engineering side. the inventing side and the testing. I'm really good at testing. I can just break anything apart and figure out what's going wrong. So root cause analysis is what I do extremely well. And that's one thing I definitely like about climbing. So I'm like, okay, we got to figure this out. What, well, why did I keep falling off? Right. So that I do extremely well. And my mind always goes directly towards that. But building is different. Building a business, building a product is manufacturing. It's not dissection. Dissection's part of that. Ripping it apart when things aren't going right is part of that. But it's not that. It's not the big part of that. So I just didn't have that vision, that building vision. I think that was appropriate. And the confidence, right? I hadn't done it before. So this was, new to me. So I think it's tough for investors to do. It's not tough for the government. The government gave me money. But investors, right? They needed to see a CEO that was much more serious at being able to do that.
So what did that look like as the company transitioned? And what was the specific kind of path of engaging with investors?
Yeah, the angels. Angels were our first group of investors that we engaged, particularly the Aggie Angel Network. So William Altman's the CEO of CorInnova. I think he's done a great job. He's got MBA from Harvard and his undergraduate degree from A&M. And then he had a great career consulting with McKinsey. So he got to see a lot of the inside of businesses and such, and raising money and how to be successful in that realm. So I think his experiences on that. And then he got involved with some new ventures on physician groups and stuff like that. So he had that under the belt, and raising money for those groups, I think, is something he learned on, and then was ready to get more into high tech and such. So the first thing he did was build a, competent board structure and advisory board as well as board of directors, and then built up business plan. And he took our non-dilutive funding and started to pursue dilutive funding. I think we banked a lot of our results and a lot of our animal studies work and such. And he was able to put that into a package that looked very clinically oriented, and much more so than I could, with a realistic business plan. And he knew what exits were possible, and he had examples of exits, right? He said, I didn't have examples of exits when people ask me about exits. That's not what I do. I don't pick up trade journals and see who's exiting where. I see some acquisitions and mergers a lot in medical devices, right? I'm like, oh, the name of that device changed. I'm like, who bought who, right? So that happens a lot, but I don't foresee it. I don't see it coming. But that was much more his, focus. His focus was on, well, how would you exit on this? How would you turn an investment into revenue and such like that?
Do you think that is a fundamental requirement, like that skill set, that way of thinking is required from an investor's perspective? Like, would you have invested in yourself if you were an outside party 20 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. There has to be some reasonable exit. There has to be some story that makes sense with other examples that says, this is where we're at. This is a good example of what we're doing. This is where we're at on our way. This is what we need money for. This is bring us to this milestone. And then after we get that milestone, we're going to raise for this, and then potential exits for a company once we're at this other milestone or this such. I think, the story's got to be there. The story's got to be there. The technology needs to be there, but how that technology fits into a business, how that business tests the market and generates revenue, has to make sense to you.
Which I think speaks to some of what you were mentioning earlier around how so many of these technologies aren't able to make it across this valley because it's this deep J curve.
It is
burning
hard.
for a long, long, long time. And the upside is incredible, but the risk is significant from an investor's perspective.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people that are new to sort of innovation and entrepreneurship, they don't really know what innovation is, because what they want is the results of innovation. They don't quite know what the burdens are. So in order to get that result, what would have to happen, right? If you see one drug on the market, how many hundreds didn't make it? Now the people that do this know our names are on those failures, right? So we know very well what can go wrong. So we know the burdens of innovation. We also know well the benefits of innovation. But you got to ask yourself, are you one of those people that know well the benefits, but not the burdens? You're probably not wise. You don't quite realize it. And I would say a lot of people in our government just do not know the burdens. They see discoveries lead to treatments, but after a lot of time, effort, sweat, tears, and there's a lot in that gap. There's a lot in that gap.
So I understand you all raised funding from a number of angel investor communities, really in Texas, and then a few outside of.
And the Houston Angel Network and Aggie Angel Network.
Yeah, I think several are listed on your website. I saw before this. What do you think made CorInnova such a compelling opportunity for them at the time when you all engaged?
Yeah, I think we got a good story, right? Treatment-wise, there are people that are grossly underserved in terms of cardiac failure and the potential to recover the heart and the potential to treat particularly biventricular failure. So when the entire heart is failing, there's just no treatments that are good. So this treatment offers the opportunity to do that. So there's a really underserved market that needs therapy, right? And there's good exits. I think medical devices, cardiovascular devices, there's TAVRs, the transapical or transcatheter valves. There's lots of technologies that once they finally got on the market, proved markets, sold very well. So there were good examples of that. So I think that's compelling. And just heart disease in general is huge. So I would say, if not 99%, 98% of our angels know somebody with heart disease, if not 100, right? It's not like they're investing in something that doesn't impact them personally. So the fact that heart disease is such a widespread problem, I think is compelling. And angels tend to have a little bit more, I think, passion or thinking behind them. VCs usually, to my knowledge, just don't, right? It's all about, does the investment make sense? And that's it. Whereas angels, I think, take a little bit more risk in that because emotionally, they're willing to give it a shot. Because this could make such a big impact.
Right. I love that point, and I think it's so important for entrepreneurs to understand that it is a very personal decision for an individual investor to write a check. Right? It's not going through a broker. It's not going through some professional manager. It is literally them writing a check to support your company. And I think that emotional connection, the other motivations beyond pure financials, though there needs to be an exit, to your point, is super critical to keep front and center. And I love that takeaway.
And it's really helpful, I think, in medical devices in particular. When there is such a gap and there needs to be a little bit of work done, I mean, the angel investors are absolutely critical. In innovation requires risk. It just does. If there's no risk, it's not innovation. It's incremental, it's improvements. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot to be done that's not innovative. It's just incremental. But for me, innovation means half the people disagree with you. And then for me, so if everybody you talk to agrees with you, you're not doing anything innovative. I'm sorry. It's incremental. It's important. It could be very useful. It could make you a lot of money, but it's just not innovative. It may be innovative from a market standpoint, maybe, but from a technical standpoint, if everybody says, yeah, not a problem, it's just incremental. So I think the innovative technologies, you need people to say, look, this ain't going to work. No. You need people to say, yeah, it's going to work. But for me, it's 50-50. So if half the people say, this is the dumbest idea I've ever seen, and the other people say, oh, yeah, this could work, my ears perk up at that point. I'm like, oh, this is innovative. And some of my favorite papers, some of the favorite work I've done have basically just been rejected over and over again and then got published. So the papers that get published right out the gate, I like them. They're good. But the ones where I had to submit it 3 or 4 times before it got published, those end up being my favorite papers. And the reason is because I actually did something innovative. It's just people looked at the paper, they looked at the results, said, oh, this is stupid. There's no way. But then eventually, right, yeah, I had the arguments or the data to prove it. So
that's incredible.
Yeah. And angels enable this. And the angels enable this for inventors.
What do you mean?
Because they could take risks, right? You just have to convince one person to invest. And so if you got a room of angels and half think it's a bad idea and half thinks it's a good idea, you'll probably get investments. So it enables innovation, right? What doesn't enable innovation is the NIH. They do the complete opposite.
Say more about that.
So for an NIH grant to be successful, every single person on the panel basically has to agree it's doable. So absolutely every expert. So they've got like 14, 15 people on the panel. And pretty much if one person disagrees, your score is going to be so bad it won't get funded.
Which is very different from the individual kind of
right
process of talking to
right.
angels or smaller communities where you have a multitude
right.
of views, and as long as one person believes.
Yeah. Then imagine if you went to an angel meeting and the only way to get investment is absolutely everyone had to agree. You'd only end up funding things that were incremental. You would never fund anything that was interesting or innovative, in my opinion. So the NIH does incremental work. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with incremental work. Patients are cured with incremental work. I mean, it's great. What bothers me is when they say it's innovative. And no, it's not. You just had all of the experts agree on a particular path. It's not innovative. It's incremental. It's incremental.
I love that. Okay, I want to ask you about pediatrics. Talk about the difference between standard medical devices and pediatric medical devices, and what makes pediatrics so incredibly difficult.
Yeah, the difference is twofold, and they both go in the wrong direction for kids. So when you're a business, what you worry about is liabilities, right? You don't want to expose yourself to financial liabilities, and you want to make profit, right? And hopefully your profits are to such a degree that you can handle the liabilities. Unlike insurance companies, right? Insurance companies are very good at that. They know what's the chance of this happening. Therefore, the rates are this, right? To cover that. I think to some degree, all businesses do this. They say, what are our liabilities? What are our outflows? And then what should we charge so that we can cover that and make a profit? For pediatrics, the liabilities are enormous and the profits are low, which is the complete opposite of what you want for a successful business, right?
So I feel like I can understand the liabilities are enormous piece. That doesn't take a lot of convincing. Help me understand the profits are small.
Yeah, it's because you can't charge enough to cover the liabilities. So you can't, there's just not, this is fortunate. It's fortunate that there's not enough sick kids. So for the markets to be higher and make it more reasonable, there'd have to be a lot of sick kids, a lot more sick kids. And then there'd be more potential to price the technology appropriately and then make up on numbers. Well, right now, the price of the technology would just have to be so high to cover manufacturing, cover design, cover distribution, cover liabilities. So to cover all the expenses you have for such a small number of patients, the price would just be such that insurance companies wouldn't cover it. And people couldn't pay out of pocket. It's just not tractable. So in a nutshell, it's a fortunate problem to have that there's not a lot of sick kids. But unfortunately, kids that are sick just don't have the devices then that they need. It's going to be tough. Business-wise, it's going to be difficult because it's a headwind. It's a headwind on liability and a headwind on numbers and profit, on market size. So you're going to have to be creative in how you do this. I think there needs to be some sharing of risk. So just on my brief area, right now, the risk on devices is all taken by the manufacturer. The manufacturer makes the device, sells the device, and then when the device doesn't work right or there's a problem, the manufacturer is sued. So, which it's not a bad model. I'm not saying that's bad. It's just, it's not going to lead to more devices for kids, though. Just because if the manufacturer takes 100% of the risk, then the price needs to be much higher. So if we share risk with hospitals, share risk with the government, share risks, and they kind of do this with the vaccine funds for complications and such. So where there's a risk pool that payments that go out to people. So something like that might work for pediatrics. But there has to be some frank discussion about the liabilities. How do we decrease the liabilities? Cap the lawsuits. I don't know if that's a way to do it, but something should be done.
Well, John, obviously that's a major problem, and surely there are innovators working in this space. Who do you know, or maybe talk specifically about SWPDC and your work there and the work that they're doing to service this need?
Yeah, and the SWPDC, that's what we're trying to do actually, is to de-risk a lot of the technologies and in a more comfortable environment so that the cost to get to market, now we can't control the liabilities when you're on the market, but we can at least maybe get the cost to develop them less. So the potential for profit's better there. And that's kind of where we're focused at on the SWPDC is really the initial part of that gap, the valley of death, right? We're trying to bridge the beginning of it.
If I'm an individual angel investor and I'm approached about an opportunity for a medical device that perhaps has an application in the pediatric space, what are the 1 to 3 of the questions that you would consider asking of that entrepreneur to help assess if this thing has legs?
Yeah, certainly. If you're looking at the business, is there an exit, right? It would be helpful if there's other pediatric devices in that indication. If it's a new indication for pediatrics, it's just challenging. So the question is, how are you going to flesh that out? How are you going to flesh out these problems in pediatrics? How are you going to take care of low numbers? What's the risk of the device? It may be a low risk device. So that's very helpful. And the team's going to be critical. I think I would hope they're dealing with one of these pediatric device consortiums. We work with you for free, and we have grants you can submit. We're not going to take any of your money, but we are going to share our knowledge and our expertise. So if one of these companies is not working with the Southwest or Midwest, there's pediatric device consortiums, and we have a link on the Southwest Pediatric Device Consortium.org page on what the other consortiums are. But there's got to be one near you. Reach out to them. They're going to have a lot of guidance on regulatory matters, as well as linking you with children's hospitals and the patient populations you need. So you need to flesh that out. If the pediatricians don't think it's a problem, right, then whatever you're suggesting isn't a solution. But we're trying to get that done early. We're trying to get the Pediatric Device Consortium to really help flesh out all the business aspects and regulatory aspects very early, very early. There are a few people doing pediatric device investment, so we want to make sure every one of them hits. Mm. And that means figuring a lot of this out sooner rather than later.
Well, John, I have 100 more questions for you, but we will wrap up there. Last question. If you had to give yourself 30 years ago one word of advice, what would you say to yourself? I
would say what I failed the most at on entrepreneurship is I just didn't hit the gas. Things just perked along. And a lot of stuff changes when you're not. It's just the market changes. So things you thought were right and could have worked, if you take too long, they've already passed you by. So I think every new endeavor that I get on, I just hit the gas. And if I don't have the time, I find someone that does, or I just don't get on it. So I think I thought that I could just have these things percolate along on the side and they'll get there. But I was wrong on that. So I would tell myself that if you're going to get involved with something like this, that's got potential for big impact, just get it going, get it moving, or just don't do it.
Love it. Well, with that, we will wrap. John, thank you for your time. This has been fantastic.
Andrew, I enjoyed talking with you. Look forward to seeing you at the gym.
Likewise.